We good? Okay, good morning. I think we're ready to get started. How are y'all this morning? Well, thank y'all for coming. I'll be honest with you. Winnie and I have done these for years, and it's really scary when you put one of these events on and you're just like, dear God, please help somebody show up. So I think for a lot of us, this is the first time we've all kind of been together. So anyway, it's good to see a lot of your faces, not on a Teams meeting or a WebEx. So I really appreciate you coming out today. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. We've got some really good speakers today, and I'm not going to talk for very much, which is a good thing. And once again, appreciate you coming out. One of the things that's kind of exciting for me is this is back in the old days, for those of you that have come to these events, it was kind of windy and me. And so I was up here worrying about computers and all that stuff. So we've got a lot of really qualified people to kind of run this. So a lot of our younger staff is running stuff. So if it doesn't work, I just look at them and they figure out how to do it. So before we get started, I do want to thank a couple of people today. So is Wendy in here? There he is. Wendy, come on up. So let's give Wendy a big, big round of applause. So a lot of you know the story. Wendy and I have known each other for about a decade. We met at church. And when I started ADV and then we started IDT, I was like, hey, Wendy, you want to come join the party? So thank you very much.
You are so welcome.
Because I'm here to tell you, if she wasn't it, we'd be having this at ADV and we'd be eating pizza for lunch.
Yeah, if that.
So yeah, if that. And you wouldn't have name tags. So Wendy, thank you. Woo. So Wendy does so many other things. One of my goals when I wake up in the morning is like, I just want to make sure Wendy has a good day, because she does IT, HR, health insurance. So anyway, she's really pulled. So if there, any accountants, we're actually looking for an accountant right now. So the next lady is Kara Turner. Kara, if you would come up. So some of y'all don't know Kara. I've known Kara for a while. And so Kara is, we started ADV marketing, and she's just hit it out of the park. So when you walk around and you meet a lot of people in booths, one of the reasons that people came and exhibited is because Kara. So Kara, we really appreciate you and your ladies kind of keeping us organized. And a lot of the graphics you see today were designed by them. So thank you very much. So we're getting a little more high tech. So you've got these little notebooks. And so what I would encourage you to do, feel like you're back in college, and take note. There will be pop quizzes today. So if you want to scribble and draw boxes and stuff like I do when I get bored at church, you're welcome to do that. But it's kind of nice. We've got a lot of presentation material, and you will not have to ask me. We'll put those on the website, and we'll definitely have some follow-up. We're using LinkedIn a lot, and so I've got some LinkedIn stories, so you can follow us on that as well. See what else I got. Thank the ladies. Really thank our sponsors. The reason that you don't have to pay today is because of all of them. And our platinum is Smart Pipe, and then ADV, we contribute a little bit as well. So what I'm really excited about, we have a lot of operators here, a lot of pipe companies, a lot of technology companies as well. So these are all of our sponsors. So once again, go out and just thank them. I know it's good for us all to get together, but we're able to have these events because of them. So these are all of our speakers and kind of our schedule, and we're going to do our best. So if you're a speaker, I know some of you have like 842 slides, and you got 30 minutes. I don't know how you're going to do it, but Kara's going to tell you 5 minutes and 10 minutes. So we're going to try to stay on schedule, because if I don't, Wendy will get mad at me because we'll get off. So I do not want to do that. So these are our speakers. I'll kind of individually introduce them. Really excited. I mean, if you've ever organized an event like this, it takes a lot of work just to get everybody together, but also to find really good speakers, because when you come, we want to make sure that you got some good content. So each of these speakers have different expertise, and I think you'll enjoy what we're going to talk about. So talk a little bit about what is IDT Expo. I like acronyms. I think in the oil and gas industry, we have our own lingo. So if you have somebody that comes into the pipeline industry, we do things like SMICE and MAOP. And so it's kind of the lingo that we have. Richard Beal, who was one of my early mentors, he hated acronyms. And every time I wrote something, he'd make me spell it out. But one of the challenges that we have in our industry is you have technology companies, and a lot of them are out here exhibiting. And then you've also got operators. So operators need the technology. And so the question is, when an operator uses a technology, how do they know that it works? And so one of the ideas behind IDT Expo is to bring everybody together. Let's talk about what's going on, talk about the problems. This afternoon, we're going to have a panel session. So it's an opportunity to get a couple of operators up here and Chris Hoidal is a regulator, and ask them questions. So I think having these conversations is how we get better. There's another group of people that we don't talk a whole lot about. And it's funny, I went to Texas A&M. I got 3 degrees in mechanical engineering. I never had a class where they talked about money. And then I get out in the real world and I'm like, apparently money is important. So maybe the engineering professors didn't get that memo, okay? But these technology companies, somebody has to put money in order for things to happen. So one of the things I've kind of thought about through this process is we need to make sure that the investors want to continue putting money into this industry so that we can have the best technology. So that's kind of what we're about today. And if you've ever been to England, and I don't have a British accent, I'm definitely from Texas, but they say mind the gap. And talks about this concept of when you're stepping onto the tube or the subway, that you make sure you mind this gap that's between the platform and the train. In the world that we're living in, there are gaps. And so part of what we're doing from a business standpoint is to find those gaps and close them. So my friend Alex Nemeth, whose name is somewhere, Alex, where are you? So Alex is with Enbridge. Yeah, so we're on a Teams meeting. How many of you spend your life on Teams meetings? Some days I wake up and I was like, I got 84 Teams meetings today, okay? Which is better than not talking to people. I do encourage you, Tony Risk and I were talking about this, when you get on there, put your camera on, okay? Because if you're muted and there's no camera, you may be vacuuming or cleaning at your desk, okay? So when we first went to Teams, everybody turned their video on, so it was kind of nice. And now you get on there, and I'll admit sometimes I do it. And if I'm on a call with you and I'm muted and there's no camera, odds are I'm not paying complete attention to you. So anyway, Alex was on. Alex had this slide. He didn't have his video on, but he was talking, so I knew he had to be paying attention. So there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can Google it, which is what I did to get this graph. And I thought it captured a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. So there's on the x-axis or the abscissa, you've got competence. And so you go from knowing nothing, which at some point, all of us in some area of our life, we knew nothing. And then you get to a point where you're a guru, you're a subject matter expert or an SME, as we say in the oil and gas industry. On the y-axis, we have a confidence level. So what happens is, and odds are we all go through this process. So you start your career and you think you know everything. You know, you're God's gift to engineering because I've got a graduate degree in mechanical engineering, and then you go work for somebody like Richard Beale who's been doing it longer than you've been alive, and you realize it's like, I'm an idiot, okay? So what happens is you get this point of peak of Mount Stupidity. Now, the good news is, as human beings, we don't stay there, or hopefully you don't. If you stay there, you're probably not going to need to find another industry. So at some point, you go down to this valley of despair, and you kind of get recalibrated and like, okay, I think I can do this. And so you keep working, and probably from a year standpoint, you know, this is probably, you figure this out in your first 6 months. If you're really not very bright, it might take you 5 years, but at some point it's going to happen. And I can assure you, if you hadn't figured it out, everybody else around you's probably figured it out, right? And so what'll happen is you move forward, and then at some point you start understanding what's going on. And so you get on this slope. The interesting thing, and if you read what's written over here on the right, is a lot of times a young person will come into the industry thinking they know a lot. And so there's a lot of this bravado. And a lot of times, one of the things I caution young engineers is ask questions. We know you don't know things, right? You're not impressing anybody by coming into a room and not asking questions, because it either means that you're trying to blow smoke or you're not paying attention. But what happens is somewhere typically between 3 and 5 years, you start figuring out there's some opportunities, and you start learning, and you start asking questions and listening. So this is a normal process. We've all gone through it. Our keynote lunch speakers, my friend Waylon Kane, and Waylon flew F-18s in the Marine Corps, and so he's got some fun stories for you. And we went to A&M together. But one of the reasons I asked him to speak, and some of you in this room flew in the military and you were in the military, you can take somebody who's in their mid-20s and you put them in charge of a platoon as a ranger, you put them in an F-18. So they're in their mid-20s and they're in charge of $30 to $50 million responsibility. Why is it in the oil and gas industry we wait till people are in their mid-30s, right? So there's something we need to do to accelerate this process and help people get on the slope of enlightenment. So I don't know where you are on the curve. There's something to be cognizant of. And the interesting thing is, if you're learning, you're always going through this process. And then when we started ADV 4.5 years ago, I didn't even know what a P&L and a balance sheet were, right? I mean, today I'm like, good golly, why would somebody start a company? But you know what? You learn. So I think that's part of why we're here today, is you're going to hear stuff, and let's just continue to learn. Okay. Of course, Lena walked away, and then it stopped. What's that? Wendy's like, I can't help you. You're on your own here. Went to sleep.
So, Chris, where are you with that?
What's that? It depends which topic, right? So if you talk about composites, right? I've been doing composites for 25 years, and I'd probably have a low IQ if I didn't understand where things were. On the business side, you know, I would say I'm trending upwards. But one of the things that I've done is I didn't know a lot about accounting, right? So I hired a really good accountant, and Wendy's been, you know, we've learned a lot about accounting. I didn't know anything about banking. We've gone through 2 banks. We have a really good relationship with the bank. They're giving us a lot of money now, which I think is a good sign. Matter of fact, perfect slide to transition here. So if you've been out to our place, we're in Waller, Texas, which people say, where's Waller? I was like, have you ever seen the movie Cars? And they're like, yeah. It's like, you've ever seen, remember Radiator Springs? That's Waller, Texas, okay? It's the town that 290 bypassed. You know, used to have a Dairy Queen, and, you know, there's a Mexican food restaurant, a Chinese, a barbecue, and a place called Hedgehog that does not serve hedgehog. So there's not much there, okay? But we've got this 17,000 square foot warehouse where we can blow stuff up, and we basically made it our home. So that was, as I described it, our starter home. Well, we are growing, we're making money, thank you clients, and, you know, so we've decided we're going to move up and on. So this is some artistic renderings. I'm hoping this time next year we're in our building. So we will not be at the Hilton Garden Inn. We'll be in Magnolia, Texas with our raccoons, deers, and pine trees. So this is our facility. It's about 36,000 square feet. It's the lab building, which is right here, if the pointer works. There you go. Yeah, it actually works. So this is the lab building. It's pretty similar to what we have. It's about 14,000 square feet. Chance is beating me because he wants it to get bigger, but we'll do that, you know, next phase 2. And then we have a big office building because Wendy and I like to meet at the center of the office building is a big conference room, which is probably about this size. So we should be able to get 180 to 200 people. So we're really excited about it. It's been a wild ride, but, you know, part of the journey that we've gone through is the journey of a lot of technology companies, right? You start with an idea and you think it's going to work, and you just keep working at it. You hire really good people, and, you know, hopefully things work out. So this is kind of my last slide. So this is kind of the deep thought for today. You know, we come to a lot of meetings, and one of the things I think I've learned the past 5 or 6 years is so much of what we do is about relationships, right? And we're not, you know, as engineers, we're not overly emotional, and we don't talk, well, I love you and all those things, but because that would really be weird, wouldn't it? Okay, went to this conference, they talked about loving people, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'm 53 years old, and Lord willing, I'm going to keep working for a longer period of time. But why I do what I do, and probably the same for you, it's about the relationships. I mean, we've got jobs to do, love being engineering, solving hard technical problems, but what is really fun, and I've got a lot of clients are kind of sitting in the back, bunch of back row Baptists back there, but, you know, we've got great relationships. You call and say, hey, Chris, we've got this problem, and we meet for barbecue, you know, at Papa's, and we talk about stuff and those kind of things. That is the most important part, right? So when I get to be, you know, in my late 70s and I'm looking back on my life, it's the relationships that count. But you know what? We rarely talk about that. And so anyway, that's kind of my encouragement today is meet some new people. You know, most of us are pretty friendly. If you were a really extreme introvert, you probably wouldn't even be here today. And so kind of, you know, it's about vision. And so I think about when we started, you know, in 2019, it was just this big warehouse. And I thought, how in the world are we going to fill this place up? And today you walk in there and we barely have room to walk around, which is good, which is a good thing. But then the last thing on the right side is the relationships, you know, and we're continuing to grow, and we like serving people. You know, if you're a consultant, you need to like doing that. So anyway, I appreciate you being here today. This is very much about making connections, technically finding out and learning about what we're doing. So I'm going to shift gears. Jeff had you come on up, and Jeff Allen with Esri. If you say ESRI, he knows you don't know anything about his company. So really excited for Jeff. Christopher DeLeon, who you're going to meet today, he's going to be our moderator for our panel, which I'm really excited about. I like to get a bunch of smart guys up here and to see how they beat up on each other. But Jeff, for the past 25 years, has been helping operators in the pipeline industry utilize location enablement technology and to manage the life cycle of their assets. And you know, he's going to talk to us a little bit about the technology. And so we kind of brought him up today to talk about the technology that they're using. I think most of us in this industry are connected to the pipeline industry, but if you're in another industry, think about how what Jeff's going to talk about could even impact what you're doing. So, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Chris, just want to make sure you're getting Chris on a free lunch, right?
I am. Yep. Oh, yeah, you're out of order. I tell you what, we'll just go with him, and then we'll get you. Yeah. Wendy. So, hey, can you fast forward to Jeff's presentation since I messed this up already? I was looking at Jeff like, oh, he's up. Need a $20 tip jar? There you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
It's all about flexibility.
Well, thanks everybody, and knocking the rust off. I got in last night from Dallas, and I got to the Hertz counter, and the lady scanned my car, and she said, "Oh, well, this car is getting ready to be old. You gotta go around and get another car." So that was my first travel mistake last night. And then I plugged in the location for the hotel, and it sent me off to somewhere else. So this is my first time getting a live audience again in about 2 years. So bear with me, but. Been in the industry for about 25 years, started out as a surveyor, worked for an engineering company surveying pipelines, and really got into this technology of GIS and using location technology to enable pipeline customers to figure out where their assets are and build a line and eventually take that data into the integrity management process and manage everything. So about 5 years ago, I left the engineering company and I went to Esri. Was one of the world leaders in this location enablement GIS technology, and started up and sort of lead their pipeline group now. So now I go all over the world and sort of preach about this technology and how pipeline companies are using this idea of location intelligence to really enable their workflows and make their information come alive. And we've seen a real kind of increase in the need for this technology. One of the projects that I was actually involved in is post San Bruno, going out and helping PG&E kind of rebuild their GIS system from scratch. And you all know the story about the long seam failure, and literally they went into their GIS system, clicked on that piece of pipe, and it said it was seamless. And everybody said, well, how do you know where else that problem exists? And everybody sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, let's go back to Iron Mountain and get all those maps out of the warehouse and redo it all, right? And so we found as okay, well, that's great. We can do all that data scrubbing and go back and find all the MTRs and find all the barbecue timesheets and barbecue menus that are in these boxes too from the bad. But basically what we determined is, hey, we put this stuff back into the GIS and use it, we're going to have to really up our game here. This is no longer just a mapping program to produce alignment sheets, right? We need to go deeper into this data, have all these documents linked, go right down into the individual components, be able to do MAOP, and then feed that data throughout the rest of the organization. And really what we see is that this becomes what we call the digital foundation for these digital twins. And you've probably all heard the concept of a digital twin and what that means. But really when we think about it, I like to kind of put this slide up here because a digital twin of your pipeline really solves 3 problems. And we always think of the first one, the historical baseline of the records, right? We build these things. That makes sense. A digital twin, really to make it come alive, we need to take real operational data and feed that back into that. Maybe this is SCADA, maybe this is operational reports, maybe this is even where people are along the pipelines, right? All this real-time data we flow in and we mash it up with the historical baseline of those records. And the reason we do this, and the real power behind this digital twin, is that we can then forward predict, right? And everybody in this room is trying to figure out, hey, if I got to have a system that could tell me where the next pipeline failure was, I can make boodles of money, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is keep these pipelines safe, figure out where they're going to fail. And if I can take all that historical baseline and real operational performance and put it together and maybe test my predictions and test my future, that's what this digital twin is trying to solve. And that's what we're bringing to the pipeline industry. Now, the other part of this, and Chris kind of mentioned on it, is, it all comes back to financials as well, right? So these pipeline companies not only try to solve their integrity management issues, but they're trying to make a bottom line, a profit, right? So companies are now seeing this location intelligence technology as a real driver to make efficiency. If I can take this data, and just a real simple example, if I can take my field crews and I can then navigate them or route them more efficiently and reduce windshield time, that's going to take that bottom dollars back to the bottom line. That's just one simple example. And there's millions of them out there where we use this location along the pipeline to help drive revenue for these pipeline operators and return on investment. And that's what this is all about. Now, it's interesting because when we look across that whole energy life cycle, I tend to get pulled into a lot of different things, right? And renewables is a new one. Everybody wants to talk about renewables and the turn to green energy and things like that. So GIS has a use case across this whole energy life cycle. But really, when I think about, whoops, did I do that? There we go. But when I think about it, that's not my next one. What's that?
I don't think we have any more slides.
Oh, really? There should be a whole bunch more slides.
That's a Chris question.
Just keep talking for that one.
I've got a jump drive over there. But when I think about the energy life cycle here, obviously there's all kinds of location intelligence things that we can do, but I really kind of concentrate on the pipeline space, right? So I dig down into those pipeline space. And what we see inside of that pipeline space is a kind of couple of interesting things. One is we see their traditional, what we call asset management or mapping group. Maybe that's part of engineering, maybe it's part of the integrity management group. These are the guys that are responsible for sort of building that baseline, right? Where are the assets? Where are they located? What are all the information? What are the linked documents? And inside that group, the next group we see is the largest consumer of that data is a pipeline integrity group. They need to take all that baseline information, bring it in, and use that as the basis for their calculations. Once we have those two groups working together, then the next logical step is to take that data and then enable it for operations, right? How do we take that data and move it out to the field so the guys that are working the pipeline have that same access to that information that's inside of that system of record? So we start working on those. The other thing that we've seen come to life is the need to bring new construction data in cleanly into the system, right? So once we've got sort of baseline assets, we're using them in integrity management, we're enabling operations, how do we cleanly bring in new record information, whether it's 1,000-mile new pipeline or 100 miles of relocation or 100 feet of relocation? And we often call that sort of stop the bleeding, right? We don't want to have to go back and do MAOP record TV, something we just built last year. We want to be able to move that data cleanly into the system of record. Once we have all that going, then we look for other opportunities, right? Health and safety, business, taking that data and reaching out to regulatory agencies, enabling other people outside the organization, really bringing that all together as a cohesive unit.
Jeff, we're gonna have somehow do copy in.
No problem.
We'll get plan to do that. You just look at me and I'll click.
When you say you're trying to get your information for construction in your pipeline, I'll say you're one intended. You already have that established?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that's where actually the world I came from was new construction, surveying pipelines, right? And it used to be that the operators themselves would have an engineering group and do the surveys. Now we started outsourcing them to AEC firms and things like that. And we see this real disconnect between all the information that we want to store in the back-end location intelligence of the GIS system and what the guy actually sees as he's looking at the ditch as that pipe's going in there, right? So we often see that there's a real connection between, hey, I need to locate the pipeline, I need to hit every weld, but I also need to bring in all this other information that came through that construction, and it all funnels into one location. Then we add that to the GIS system. So a lot of that process, some of it's technology, but a lot of it's process driven as well, right? We're just bringing in a ton of data and consolidating it.
Hey, Jeff, we're going to change clickers.
Hang on.
Oh, no problem. There's that's what I've just been talking to for a few minutes there. So I've done this enough. I can remember the slide in the back of my head. I can't remember what the next one is, but I can remember what that one was. So as I said, we have the asset management, pipe integrity, and this is where we're sort of enabling this location intelligence technology across the organization. At Esri, we often talk about going wide, right? We pretty much have Esri technology in almost every operator out there, but we only have it in little silos. GIS didn't start as an enterprise system. It started as a departmental tool for building as-built alignment sheets from CAD, right? That's where this all came from. I remember I was a CAD guy, and then we had GIS. I was like, oh, let's do this in GIS, right? So that's where it's all started from. But then we said, oh, there's value to this information. And this is where the integrity guys and the GIS guys often kind of have loggerheads, because the integrity guys go, hey, your data's no good, it's not complete, it doesn't have everything in there. Like, yeah, but it has everything I need to make an alignment sheet. That's what its purpose was when we started this thing. Now we need to expand that for more information, because not only are we just generating alignment sheets for operations, but we're trying to enable the whole company to use this technology. Now, how do I do this? How do I walk into a company and sort of figure out what the use case is? And so if you've ever worked with Esri technology, you know we call it ArcGIS everything, right? It's alphabet soup of stuff. We've sort of boiled the ocean down to the patterns of uses. And so if you can tell me a problem and I could figure out the pattern, I can link you back to the technology. And so now we have these things, and this is what we put in front of the guys. And we don't talk about the back-end servers and the maps and other things that go into it. We talk about these patterns of use. So if you're an integrity guy and say, hey, Jeff, I need to locate all these anomalies, and I need to track which ones have been done, and I need to route my field crews there. I go, okay, I've got some data management, I've got field mobility, and I've got some decision support, right? So I can take these three patterns, I can plug them together, and now I can build you a system in the background that will. So this is a really kind of key slide for us these days to help break down the barriers between the technology people and the people that are trying to get their work done and put this together in a seamless way. And so we think of that concept of GIS that we've always heard of. GIS is really weave together three fundamental components. The system of record that I've been talking about this morning, that's that database of all the assets and where they are. The system of engagement, how do I now take that data and easily give it to everybody that's not a GIS professional in my organization, right? Whether it's on their iPhone or on their web maps or in a printed form. And then a system of insights, which is often overlooked. These are the analytical tools that we run against that data. So I often say the system of record is my noun. My system of insights is my verb, right? It's the things I do against that data: class, HCA, risk, integrity. Those are the things I do against that. We weave all these things together and make it a seamless system. And that is what GIS is all about. And so one of the things, and we focus on this for a while, is the GIS professionals. These are the people within these pipeline organizations that are building these data sets, right? These are the key guys that build the foundation that all these other technologies are based on. But then we create what we call a destination portal. And when GIS first moved off a desktop PC and onto the web or onto a browser, what we did as GIS professionals, we put every widget you could think of in this one web map, right? If you were a right-of-way guy or you were an operations guy, a risk guy, there was one web map you went to and it had everything on it. Now what we're doing is we're breaking these down into fit-for-purpose applications. So if you're a right-of-way guy, I'm going to give you a right-of-way tool. And we call it 3 clicks or less, right? You want to get that information easily. It's a tool in your toolbox. I don't want to make you a GIS professional. I want to give you location technology that makes your job easier, whatever it is. And we put all these things together in an easy to access spot that runs off the same set of maps and the same set of underlying data, but has different functionality based on who you are and what organization. And so this is just a kind of an example of one of those dashboards that might be in there. This is showing a mosh-up of location of pipelines and wellheads and real-time information coming from SCADA, easily recognizable. I can go in here as a user. I don't have to be fully trained on being a GIS guy to be able to use this, but I can easily see what's going on in my system and understand it, right? Or if I'm a right-of-way guy and I'm trying to see, hey, where's the current status of my right-of-way acquisition for this new pipeline I'm building, right? I can go into a separate map and see that information and kind of bring these stories alive as we start to use these maps. Now, the other thing that's really driving our technology is this, we call it consumerization of the GIS. In other words, you know, Chris was talking about the 20 and 30-year-old guys that are coming to our company, right? So, you know, how many of us have just used our phone to find the nearest Starbucks, right? We do it all day, every day. It's our natural way of life now. And you got these new guys that are coming to the company and go, why can't I find the mainline valve the same way, right? They expect this technology. When I first started doing this, we were doing data collection digitally. I went out and there was this guy, big gloves, you know, and I was just a fast talking kid from Boston. And he was like, boy, what are you doing here, right? And we use paper notebooks. We don't need your digital stuff. You know, we're just going to do it. And now we go on the field, that is switched, right? That people in the field are like, hey, what's this paper map all about that hasn't been updated for 10 years in the back of my truck? Like, I know this data is in the GIS. Give it to me in a way that I can consume it, right? So we're seeing this field adoption because people understand what's possible. You know, the best thing for Esri was Google Maps. You know, you think it's a competitor of ours? Hell no. It put maps in everybody's hand, and they came in and said they want the same thing in the back office. They want enterprise systems that do this. Google Maps isn't going to put your pipelines on there. Esri's going to put your pipelines on there, but you're going to expect that same ease of use, and that really pushes us in our technology as well. And that really where it comes in is that we need to not only have that mapping data, the alignment sheet data in the GIS, but we need to tie it into all these other back-end systems. There's thousands of spreadsheets out there. There's other databases. There's other business systems, and we're about tying that data together because one of the things, if you ever hear a GIS guy say everything goes into GIS, that's not correct, right? That's old school thinking. We used to say, oh, put it all in GIS, we'll have one hot repository. It's not practical. There are other tier 1 business systems within these organizations that have specific use cases, that have specific roles to play. And what we do is we stop talking about the system of record. We talk about the system that maintains that data. And from a GIS perspective, we maintain location. That's it. We tell you where it is on the face of the earth. Now, we'll tell you the OD, the wall thickness, the SMICE, and everything else that goes along with it because there is another system in the organization that has that data. But if you're asking me about material supply chain and where that came from, well, probably not GIS is going to tell me that. There's probably some other system, SAP, Maximo, these other tier 1 systems in the organization. We need to pull that together and we start all working in cohesion so I don't create multiple versions of the truth within the organization. That is the death of data. Once I have data and start copying it and that data gets out of sync and it's no longer the real data and somebody picks it up and uses it to make a decision, that's where the real train comes off the tracks. So this integration of these things with GIS being the kind of, we call it the ultimate foreign key. If you're a database, if you've ever worked with Excel or things like that, you're trying to link things together, we call it foreign keys. Location, where it is on the face of the earth, is the ultimate foreign key. Because once I know where something is, and I know where this is, I can start making relationships against that. There's no Excel spreadsheet in the world that's going to tell you this well is 50 feet from this stream crossing, unless I put every distance to every stream crossing for every weld. But if I have a map that has all my stream crossings, I have a map that has all my welds, now I can use location intelligence to start deriving those types of information. And that's where the real power of this comes to play. And so we help companies transform this and bring this all together across the organization and really start connecting these groups together. So risk and integrity and operations and nominations and construction and health and safety are all pulling from the same set of oars. Right? They're all using location to tie their information together, and they're all pulling from that central repository. Now, this is an important slide too, because this has also been something that GIS has probably been guilty of in the past, is that we could do all this stuff for years, but it was a heavy lift, right? It was an IT project that took months. The business would come to IT and say, hey, we wanted this web map. Oh, that's great. We'll need to buy servers, and then we'll need to find a developer, and then 18 months later, then we roll the project out and the business has moved on and they figured out a different way to solve their problem. So now we're really seeing this kind of configure first. where we say, hey, we're not going to develop anything until we really figure out that what we have doesn't work out of the box. And this is going to allow us to get these sort of solutions in the hands of the end users faster than ever, right? And so when we look at that asset management and we dig into it a little bit, you know, one of the things that I've been sort of working on at Esri here is to figure out how to do this entire supply chain, right? Because when you think about putting stuff in a database or location enablement, the needs of the guys in the offshore and onshore gathering, completely different than the midstream pipeline guys, completely different from the downstream guys. And just as I said, we don't want to copy data. We don't have 3 different GIS systems just to be able to maintain this data. So one of the things that we've been working at really hard is to figure out how to plug a system together that allows me to go wellhead to the meter tip and everything in between and have that fundamental underneath it. And so this is a typical transmission system that we might see in our system. And then in the transmission segment, we're using what we call linear referencing, where we create linear points along a measured route to put that into the GIS. And this is a typical, you know, alignment sheet view of that data along a pipeline. These might be all the different integrity results that I have inside of my pipeline system, and pull that together and use dynamic segmentation to output that and report on it. These are just ways that we're modeling pipeline data in our system and pulling that all together. I'm running a little short on time, so I'll skip across a couple of these slides here. But now we're taking that and taking it to the next level and building more intelligence into the pipeline system and created connected networks. So typically in my GIS, my transmission system, I'd have lines of my main line data coming down, and maybe I have a facility at the end. Maybe it's a point on the map or a polygon. Now we're digging into those facilities and say, hey, we can now map inside the fence as well and have a connected network. And now even deeper in saying, hey, I need to go inside that building, not only inside the fence, but now let's go inside the building and build a digital twin of those assets inside of there. So we're having this concept of a GIS within a GIS that we can even build out more detailed things. And then once I have that connected network, I can do some really cool stuff like pressure trace. Show me all the components in that network that see the same pressure and tell me the limiting MAOP of design and test along that pipeline segment, right? Interesting things we're starting to do. Or alternatively, instead of showing it on a map, show the operation as a static. So this is that same tank farm shown in a single line diagram tied right directly to my SCADA system, right? Different views of that same location information. Or maybe we have a pump station or a compressor station along that main line, digging in there and seeing all the components both above and below ground. And then finally start to pull that 3D CAD data. Right? So now we're going into the 3-dimensional world where we have these BIM files that have been sitting in a file drawer somewhere from the original design, bringing that into the GIS and be able to visualize all those components, not in a 2D map, but a 3D world. And then finally, when we get inside these large facilities, there are often other systems out there that also have digital twin information. So we don't think of Esri as the only digital twin, but there might be other digital twins that we want to talk to. So in this case, this was another pretty complex, obviously, piping facility, but it was an island unto its own, right? Very detailed, 3-dimensional. They didn't even know where this was on the face of the earth, nor did they know how it connected to the next facility downstream. So we're using this digital twin connecting to our GIS digital twin to find the next digital twin downstream and pulling all that information together in a single source. So that's what we're all about. That's what I do at Esri. This kind of idea of the science of where is kind of our tagline, but it's all about location intelligence and where things are at. And I appreciate all your time this morning. I'll be around today if anybody has any follow-up information. And Chris, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
So for all of our speakers, we got these, I'm trying to get fingerprints on it. So
Fantastic.
they're really nice memento for you.
Thank you very much.
It's all about the LinkedIn post.
Awesome.
That was
Thank you
awesome.
very much. Thanks.
Great. Let me take the mic. So Lena, you fixing over? So now we'll have Chris come up. So I'll let you mic up. Mic up and put that clown hat on. I'll just do it for you.
Okay.
So I'll,
Hello? All right.
you're on. So
Fantastic.
I'll talk kind of like Chris Hoidal. So we were real excited. He's here. He flew in yesterday. And we spent time together. He's going to talk about, we're supposed to call it the new gas rule. It's not the mega rule, right? So
No, not the mega rule.
it is the gas rule because it's not really new.
It's like a transformer. The other parts of the mega rule are coming.
So anyway, he's very entertaining. Obviously, those of us in the pipeline industry, regulations play a very important role. So Chris, we're really glad you're here and appreciate you coming.
Great. And it's my last presentation with the government.
That's true. He is officially retiring, I guess, end of this month. Right?
Correct,
We're now in
yes.
December. So we're going to miss you, but we'll see you around.
Yeah, I'll be around. Don't worry. Hi, welcome everybody. Good to talk to you. It's really funny that you put up that Dunning-Kruger slide because I actually have that same slide in our presentation for the training of the inspectors because they're all feeling despair. I mean, they all read the rule. I know it, and then they actually start going out and trying to do some, pilot inspections or the early inspections, and they go, crap. There's so many shades of gray. There is so many shades of gray. So we're trying to come up with methodologies, both for us and for you guys, to kind of climb out of that valley of despair. I gave a lot of the same presentation at AGA, so I'm going to blow by those early slides, but I'm hoping that, Chris, you guys can upload these because it kind of hangs together, because there are some people that don't know the genesis of the regulation. I don't get the fancy presentations. I have to use the boiler template that the feds give us. I got presentation envy, definitely. Quick rule review. We're talking about the implementation dates, compliance tools that are already out there. They've been out there. Kind of surprised some of the companies we have visited don't seem to know that they're out there. How we trained our inspectors, what they're going to be focusing on, because if you guys know what they're focusing on, it'll help you get through the audits. Areas where expectations between regulated and operator are different is, I call it pinch points, where you would think that we would all know what we expect. We're still having some differences in opinion, I guess, of what the regulation says. And I got to briefly touch, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the new regulation on gas gathering came out right before Thanksgiving. And for those people here that have composite pipe businesses, it allows for the use of composite pipe in gas gathering. So, all right, so I'm going to talk about that. The mega rule got split into three. We're going to be primarily talking about RIN 1, which was issued 2 years ago. It addresses things like San Bruno and Sissonville. The repair criteria, it's very important. A lot of RIN 1 will make sense when RIN 2 comes out. It's knocking at the door. I don't know what's going to go out first, whether the valve rule or the RIN 2 is going to go out, but it's really close going out. RIN 3 was published, like I said, a week before Thanksgiving, and it's got some good opportunities for companies that use composite pipe. Two big focuses long-term are MAOP reconfirmation, including this material attribute data collection for that, to support that. Want to be really clear, material attribute collection is just not for 624, it's also for 712. And when I say 712, that's the repair criteria. So while material attribute information may not be critical, if you're not doing MAOP reconfirmation, it will become increasingly more important when you're doing anomaly evaluations. Assessments outside of HCA, so that we all know you got a lot of time for that, but MCAs, class 3, class 4 on previously, well, pipelines that don't have to meet subpart O. You guys are supposed to have plans for that, and but it's only limited to piggable MCAs over 30% of SMICE. I mean, we're not seeing as much additional mileage as we originally thought. I do want to spend a lot of time talking this afternoon in this breakout session about the ability to not have to do special permits for new technology, but you now have the ability to go through 192.18. This regulation kind of gave you guys the portal to avoid special permits and go straight to the use and adoption of new technology. So these are things that were due last year. We gave you guys a pass because of COVID, except for the reporting. These are the things that we're inspecting right now. The things that highlighted in yellow, I'm highlighting because this is where significant effort by the inspectors is being spent. MCAs are supposed to be done by the end of this year. That's, I mean, no, they were supposed to be done the end of last year. But we did have a few companies say, hey, I have nothing that needs reconfirmation. I have nothing that needs to have assessments. So they are allowed to wait till this year because they need that MCAs for reporting. But if they don't need it for any other reason, yeah, you're right, they have to the end of this year. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. They need it for annual reporting requirements, but they do not need it for MAP reconfirmation or 710 assessments. So we did give a few of the early operators a pass where they said, we got nothing that needs to be reconfirmed or assessed. Launcher receiver safety. Seeing that a lot of companies in compliance with that. Sometimes the supporting procedures. Sometimes the supporting procedures for the new launchers and receivers or the retrofitted launchers and receivers. You don't see procedures for it, or even a requirement to maybe hold a tailgate before you use that launcher receiver. So it looks like the hardware is there. Sometimes the supporting procedures are not there, and the OQ training for those procedures. Use of 192.18 notifications, that's going to come up over and over. We are getting in notifications. Don't be shy. So far we've approved or partially approved everything that's come in. So, whether it be using ILI to promote, better determination of population groups. Instead of potholing every mile, let's just use those ILIs to figure out where population groups are and maybe use a reduced sampling. But somebody's got to go first. I mean, that's the point. I mean, it seems like I don't know what the downside of asking for a notification is. There's already special permits out there that you can kind of use as a template, but do the notifications. And we were told by Congress that we do need to consider alternative technologies. The annual report, guys, at the end of this year, you need to button up what you have and be ready to submit the annual report based on the information as of 12/31. These things are up there already on the site. These FAQs. I'm going to talk about this because I've been promising the second batch of FAQs now for 6 months, and one FAQ is being highly debated. We'll talk about that, but these FAQs are out there to help you guys get out of that valley of despair. 44 were issued last year. The second 24 are done. We actually added I'll jump ahead. We actually added one more FAQ because we had so many questions from operators that I didn't go through the public announcement process. I went straight to it. On what it is if you reconfirm a grandfather pipeline, you can continue to operate at over 72% of SMICE. It's not in the code, but it is in the preamble. So there was a lot of debate. I had to recant what I said on that one topic because I thought if you reconfirmed, you couldn't continue to operate over 72% of SMICE. It's buried deep into the preamble. So that's an important thing for grandfather pipelines. So the batch 2 FAQs are under legal review. I would say the biggest remaining issue with batch 2, it's this, and I'm just being very transparent. If you read the code explicitly for grandfather pipelines, it doesn't explicitly entertain the use of previous hydro tests as a reconfirmation. But you go look at the law. You look at the law, the regulation is supposed to be focused on non-tested pipelines. So there's a little bit of a disagreement there. There is middle ground because let's say you use some hydro test from 1980, 1990, that you reconfirmed a class 1 grandfather pipe. That does meet method 1, except for 2 things. You're supposed to use a higher safety factor for class 1, which is 1.25, and you're supposed to have material attribute data for the headers were. So maybe that's where it's going to end up is instead of making them retest the pipeline using one of the 6 methods, Maybe the middle ground is, okay, use that old hydro test, but grab some material samples for where that headers were. Don't know how you get around the 1.25 because that is one of the requirements of the new regulation. I personally think that's where it's going to end, because you got one camp that's saying, no, you must proactively go back and reconfirm that MAOP. The other camp goes, hey, the subpart J, it's good enough. I think the middle ground may be where they end up because no matter what happens, we don't want to give more deference to a grandfather pipeline than a new pipeline, so that one question is held up because it's quite a debate. And I understand that the industry is actually going to go in and talk to our administrator about that very topic. Forms are up there. Go to our PHMSA.dot site. The forms are up there. They're put into a logical format where you can access the inspection questions ahead of time, and you can even access flow charts that go with this convoluted narrative that they put in the regulation. So we did do that for you guys. So those are actually buried into the inspection forms. So go to the PHMSA.dot site, go to the, basically it's under pipeline compliance forms. You go down to the one directive, it's 69 questions. It's about 30 are procedure questions, 30 are record questions, about 8 or 9 are observation questions. It's not that onerous, and that is what the inspectors are asking. We have done pilots. We did 5 pilots. We are doing inspections right now. They are well into the inspection process. I'm going to share with you some of the lessons learned with those early inspections. I don't think that third bullet's going to happen. They're going out there doing these MAOP reconfirmations, inspections, assessments outside of HCA, inspections. I said, this is too hard. We're going to make specialized inspections. And we use them to basically sync up, get, like I said, get out of that valley of despair. I encourage you to talk. I am not allowed to share the enforcement considerations that were used for, when I say enforcement considerations, is like, how does the inspector judge what's good or what's bad, what's adequate, what's not? I would contact one of these pilot operators, and they actually have copies of what was used as almost like a metric. Okay, so this is what, I have to look at this again. This is what the pilots, the overarching pilot results. They had great, where's Jeff? They had, all of them had amazing GIS systems. They were hanging everything off of these GIS systems. It was really easy to identify whether or not they had, what records they had. MTRs were linked to alignment sheets, ratings of components. I mean, down to, even small little instrument lines. Everything was on the documents. I don't know how that's going to play out for the smaller operators. This gets back to this first issue is it's not clear whether companies are 619C pipelines or 619A pipelines. We are 2 years into this, and some companies, they have all the TVC records. They have, so even if it's something was done in the 60s, they have a subpart J hydro test or equivalent, yet they still call themselves grandfather because they don't want to give up their SMICE. So we get these hybrids, and that is, again, that problem I was talking about earlier. It's like, what do you do with these? What's the middle ground with these? And it's only really grandfather pipelines, class 1 with an HCA and MCA. It's not a huge population group, but it's becoming really problematic with this inspections, particularly since the first batch of inspections they did, they tackled the bigger operators in the Northeast. I would have started with something easier. Subpart J compliant records, I think we've reached a pretty good spot in this. Let's say they were just missing an elevation. Let's say they were just missing a signature. You can go back and recreate the elevation. People are doing that. They have all the other information, but then maybe they didn't adjust for elevation. Maybe they didn't have somebody's signature. That's fixable. It may not meet all the requirements of subpart J, but we're open to, fixing it after the fact. Opportunistic digs. I don't know why a company would not avail themselves for opportunistic digs at every anomaly, at every repair. Some companies want to make sure they have adequate time to schedule these things. But like I said, RIN 2 is going to, it's going to be an advantage to the operator if they have this information. So don't miss an opportunity to do these opportunistic digs. ECA analysis, I thought I'd see more of these. Lines are piggable. Pigs are good now. They can tell a lot about anomaly and the characteristics of the defect. You supplementing with material data. A lot of the companies didn't even have ECA analysis or that method for MAOP reconfirmation. I was kind of surprised about that. And then, you know, which components are in and which ones are out. So that was from the pilots that were done at the beginning of the summer. We trained our inspectors. All the state inspectors, 59 state inspectors from 43 different states, and 22 federal inspectors have all been trained. Hopefully they're coming to you with a consistent viewpoint. The whole point was consistency. It's always hard, I mean, but that was the goal. You guys are gonna, if you think that when the inspectors come out, they're just gonna be focused on the new regulations, they're going to go back and make sure that the MAOP as is correct, particularly with respect to 611. Did they adjust the class location correctly? You know, we found a lot more issues with 611 than we did with 624. More issues with 611 than 624. I was really surprised. Okay, we're doing the specialized inspections. We based it on the old annual reports. We screened out some of the small diameter pipelines. And basically the focus this year and early next year are going to be grandfather pipelines with class 3 and 4 areas. So if you have a grandfather pipeline class 3 and 4 areas, you got to, unfortunately, like a target on your back. But once we get the annual reports for next year with all the new information, they're going to re-rack that. I want to make sure you guys have the equivalent forms. They're identical to what the states are using. Okay, so these are the operative slides. What's still happening? Where are we having the problems? Again, the use of previous subpart J hydro tests. This needs to be resolved. Non-TVC high tests, we're allowing companies to, you know, to supplement stuff that's almost there but not quite. What we aren't allowing is an affidavit from 20 years after the hydro test. Or, you know, let's say somebody did a hydro test back in the 60s. A lot of times it's just as good or better than what's required by subpart J. But if they're missing key things like, you know, duration or any pressure recording records, we're not accepting that, because if it's going to be a kick out, whether you have to do MAOP reconfirmation based on a good subpart J hydro test, we want to make sure it's a good hydro test. Proper opportunistic dig definitions. A lot of companies were saying, you know what, only if we can schedule these things in a real orderly manner are we going to do them. This is what the inspectors are saying. I mentioned this earlier. Anomaly investigations after an ILI run. We consider that to be an opportunistic dig. A repair, opportunistic dig. Hydro tests, you have to do them at the header locations. So there's certain things that we said, hey, it's up to you to determine what opportunistic is, but these things must always be included. And that is in one of the FAQs. And if it's unsafe, we don't want to put anybody in harm's way, but you're supposed to go back there and get it. I just think it's crazy that people aren't using ECA analysis if their lines are piggable and they have good material information. But a lot of companies say, we'll never use it. We're just either going to hydro test or replace. I don't think that's true. And I think they're quickly going to realize that they need to come up with an ECA method appropriate for their pipe. And they can't rely, they don't want to rely on that default values that's in the code, because they're going to be repairing everything. They're going to have to go out and collect the information to support an ECA analysis. Smaller companies, they're just parroting the reg. They literally cut the reg and just drop it in into the procedures. You know, that's fine if you point somewhere else, but some of the smaller companies, they're just, It's literally, they cut and paste right out of the regulation, and we're finding some of that with the less resourced companies. Number 6 is an issue. If you are, let's say you're using in situ testing, the Frontrix or the MMT or something like that, and then there's other ones out there, they need to be OQ'd. They're touching the pipe, they are taking off the coating, but those people should be covered at OQ. Cutting a casing off a pipeline to get to the pipe, 10 minutes? Got it. All right, so make sure that any tasks where you're actually working on the pipeline that's operating, they make sure those people and all the contractors used to support those efforts are OQ covered. All right. This is one thing that's different about this regulation. It got rid of the real onerous special permit process and allows you to go directly to getting some relief to use alternative technologies. I mean, knowing the demographics of this group, this is probably the most important part of the reg for you guys, because it's a new regulation. You don't have to worry about creating a quid pro quo because it's brand new and it says you can use these. So if somebody wants to, instead of doing a reconfirmation of a pipeline, do an insert, or if somebody wants to use ILIs to determine population groups, or a lot of, I can't even imagine some of the other things, but this thing is a lot speedier, and we're getting back to the companies with a no objection letter, typically within a month, as opposed to years with a special permit. One caveat, we kind of use the old special permit requirements as kind of like a template saying, does it kind of meet these? I mean, for example, if somebody wants to use a composite pipe, does it have a thing in there where they actually pull samples every few years to make sure it's not degrading? Or as people do, let's say somebody said, I'm going to use an ILI tool to estimate population groups. As that information comes in, is a company going back and seeing whether or not what the ILI said matches what's found in ditch? So they are putting a little caveats in there. But the turnaround at our end has been actually pretty fast with this. But don't screw up. That's all I can say is, I hope one company comes in there kind of let's say 6 companies get approved to use this methodology, and the 7th company, something tragic happens and they grossly underestimate the SMICE, or they grossly underestimate the Sharpie's value. I don't want to just lose the ability to access this part of the rule. So that's a huge change. I want to spend a few seconds talking about the new gas gathering rule. There is now a 3rd class that's being added, Type C pipelines, where you guys have to ensure different levels of compliance depending on the diameter of the line. Like 8 to 12 inch must do these few things. And it could be emergency response, but it's only for those gas gathering systems that aren't Type A, Type B. It's basically anything greater than 8 inches that can affect a population group. I'm paraphrasing because I'm running out of time. So what they do is they have this new category, Type C. There's actually a Type R where you have to report all gathering lines on an annual report, but we're focused on Type C. It's 90,000 miles of Type C are affected. But this is the most important part of this. It explicitly allows for the use of composite materials. So that's a big change. I think it's 192.9H. I'm just off the top of my head. So go back, it just came out, look at that. There's some opportunities there. So when you go, you're going to have to report any gathering lines you have. There's 420,000 miles of gathering lines out there. They have to be reported. But for the bigger lines, greater than 80 inches, 90,000 miles are going to have a damage prevention program, emergency response plan. A subset of that is going to have corrosion, line markers, leak survey requirements. Then even a smaller subset of that, just think of like a reverse pyramid, are going to have MAOP requirements. It is effective next May. Just when you think the regulations are piling on, you get another one. I know. So I wanted to just make sure you understand this. That's it. 8 inches and greater, you need to do a few things. 8 to 12, a little bit more, but then over 12.75, you got to reestablish the MAOP. But what's nice about this is you're allowed to, like I said, use composite pipe. All right, that's it. Close.
So Chris, I gotta get a picture with you.
Oh. I get the obelisk.
You do. Make sure you get the right one.
Wasn't it like these obelisks last year that were appearing in the middle of the desert? Whatever happened to that?
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job, man.
I appreciate it.
Here you go. You want the box? Hey, Simone, come on up. So this is Simone Bellemare. I'm going to embarrass him a little bit because I don't get to do that very often.
Go right ahead.
Brendon as well.
Yeah.
See ya. We're going to co-present.
Yes.
So these gentlemen are with NNT. I met Simone back in 2016 at the International Pipeline Conference. You remember that? You had your booth set up and you're peddling your new technology.
All the hair going around.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. Back in the crazy days. So anyway, we just kind of immediately connected. I feel like I've known him for 20 years. One of the things I really like about his story is he's an MIT graduate. So as engineers, you know, MIT is a very prestigious school, but MIT has kind of what I call an incubator model. So as he finished his PhD up and he developed a technology, there's a whole community that really supported him and allowed him to launch. So anyway, I'm trying to get A&M to do something like that because I think it's a great model, but it's a great story. And I know Buddy Powers is working with him and y'all doing some really good things. So Simone,
Hey,
look forward to it.
thank you. So there's one thing in common with Chris Hoidal just before is I retired from design a while ago. And Brendon Willey here is going to co-present. He's really going to go more towards really the hard part of doing this right. He's retiring in 3 months from doing that. He's still staying with the company, but we're going to have a replacement. We need to elevate him. So really what we are going to, do I get a?
Somebody took it.
Wendy? Do you have the clicker? I do have some good cartoons. This is not going to be as intense as reading the regulations. It's this. Bear with us here. So we're going to tell us about test instrument design, very specifically. Well, that's why I said it's a lighter topic because everybody likes the idea of designing, right? We can sit around here and say, hey, you know, it'd be great to have this, it'd be great to have that. And all engineers, you go into this kickoff meeting for anything and, you know, everything is cool. Now, who should go into that meeting? Okay, 2 options for you. You want the scientist for the design meeting or you want the engineer? So typically the scientist wants to advance the knowledge and the engineer wants to fulfill a specific need. So that's really going to be a team here for this presentation where you're designing really for something specific and you got to understand what that thing is. And you'll see it's harder than it looks. So this is just a definition. I didn't invent this idea that scientist and engineer are different. So inventing something and designing something is kind of can go together and it takes time. So I used the light bulb here where the first time you realize it works was 78 years until Edison sold the first light bulb. So, you know, you got to be there for a long period of time for that to happen. And, you know, airplanes, it's more 30 years. Disposable contact lenses. I mean, how hard is it, right, to take a plastic and just make it work? It's still 10 years, okay? And that time frame still remain. And honestly, it speaks to something that, you know, you go back through, you know, your own experience and think about, you know, one of the professors that was my mentor at MIT said, you know, you can come up with the best alloy for aerospace, but don't even try it. It's going to take you 15, 20 years before you can actually sell it. And yet, guess what we did, right? We did the technology company. We did go and invent something. So we'll talk a little bit about that here, where if you are in a new market, which is what MMT was faced with, this was 2016 here, was kind of like a good day. The valley of despair was 2017 right here, and then eventually things go well. If you keep working very hard at it. So it's just a little background because, you know, a lot of people wonder what it is. And back in the days, I had people telling me, oh, this must be so cool, you know, to work on something brand new. And you know, there's a lot of years that I would, you know, you look at all your photos and you say, yeah, I had a good time there. But, you know, most morning, not really. So it's just a reality. Okay, so we're diving really into what design means. You have a need, you create concepts, then really the biggest thing, and this is where it always becomes difficult, is are you going to try, right? Are you going to try your concept against the need that you've identified? And that's really the big piece here that I can probably, as far as MMT, take some credit for. I put my name on it, right? You know, I founded a company. I said, guess what? We're going to do this. But then in terms of really doing the piece from there of taking the very small amount of money, and there's an expression from Buddy, like it was your grandmother's saving account, which is what Brendon did, to go to a number of iteration to actually make something that, again, fulfill the need. So you'll see a little bit the ins and out. And honestly, I just want to be 100% clear. We're not trying to sell anything today, right? I mean, we have a piece of equipment there, but the purpose is to explain the process. And I'm using MMT really as an example from teaching. That's kind of how people kind of connect. Some people like the concept. Some people really just like the example. Somebody like the joke, but we don't have that many of those. So as far as the need and the concept, there's a fundamental difference between a large company and a small company. So a lot of time, if you are a startup, you have an idea first, and now you're trying to see who's going to utilize it. And it's really the hard way to do things. If you want to do that, there is government funding for that, these SBIR programs. So that's a good thing. But for us, you know, decide to do frictional sliding. It's just a new way to test the material. And then the question is, okay, so who's going to want to actually pay for that, right? So this is a common theme in this incubator world of startups that is not just in Massachusetts. We're part of an incubator here in Houston, Greentown Labs. There's Iron. It's growing in Houston as well as we speak. But the pivoting in this case is not on the equipment design itself, is what the need is. What exactly are you going to try to build? And it takes time. It takes a lot of effort, especially for an engineer, to go into a room where, you know anybody, you don't know anybody, and you just got to get to your answers. This whole concept, and I try to do that here, get some references. Steve Blanken, of course, we're willing to circulate those slides. This is the first thing I called in and say, hey, can I get a little funding, you know, to start doing this? I got this great idea. So, well, do you know Steve Blank? No, I don't. So Steve Blank is the grandfather on how to do a startup in a way that you spend enough time defining your target of what you're going to be designing. So I just thought that was very, very important. So here's the example for us is I have to go back 25 years to speak to the company that we have today. This is the first professor, really literally the first lecturer as an undergrad of material science. He said, you know, we got this hardness tester and it's easy to use, but it's not really accurate. And it just percolated in my mind, right? This guy, you know, looks serious, looks like he knows what he's doing. And then, of course, there were other people. But I remember that day. He was going over Rockwell, Brunel, Berkovich. I mean, I'm sorry I missed a few of those famous guys. But It's really only in 2003 when I was at MIT that I was going into the lab and they were doing still indentation, but very, very sophisticated equipment. And I asked, I say, what if I take that machine, can I slide instead of just indenting down? And say, well, not this one, but this Frankenstein here in the corner, you could do that with that. I was like, oh, that's great. That's the machine I want to use. So I came with the idea that you would literally go and instead of pulling on the material, you'll do this frictional sliding test and get the information. And there was a need, was paid by Office of Naval Research, things like that. It was a really good thing at that time. It was really science. My thesis advisor said, you got to find something that's never going to be useful to people for at least 10 years. I said, fine. And that's really kind of the time that it took. So in 2010, and this is really going back to the need, I was working on aging infrastructure, bridges, cranes, a lot of stuff that collapsed and break, and they tried to figure out why. And it came back again, this question of material property, including for welds and things like that. So it's like, gosh, you know, I had that thesis and people are still saying it's complicated, blah, blah. It is complicated because if you do it in the lab, it's very hard to keep your surface perpendicular. You sand it down and now you have all these curvatures. You have to deal with that. So really, it was over more some drinking beer. That's nothing really horrible. I came up with the idea, what if I have a tripod there? What if I'm able to self-correct for the curvature of my sample? That sounds, you know, simple. Just like, you know, table saw's got a guide there that you can, you know, cut plywood to the same width all the time. But it was new. So, you know, file the first patent, start thinking about it. And the aspect of being really lack of knowledge when you get that peak at the beginning, it was like, well, any, you know, equipment manufacturer is going to want to take that idea and just take it to home run, so I'm done, right? So went to Instron, MTS, for those who knows about mechanical testing. Oh, this is very interesting. Keep going. So there we were back then, and I put some people here, mentors, just my uncle, who said, you know, you seem to believe in this. So, you know, if you put some of your own money, I'll put some of mine. But really the tough part is not necessarily the idea in my case, because by nature, I'm non-conformist. I'm kind of dressing okay today, but you know, I don't mind thinking outside the box. I don't mind challenging certain things. I've learned to do it a much better way, I hope. You know, there's something that says this is probably something that you can inspire your kids with. You're going to come up with a great idea. You better come up with a lot of ideas, okay? Because most of them are not going to be good, but don't get discouraged about that. It's all sheer volume. I have no painting talents, but if you go to every famous painter, musicians, the best work, they would just, you know, going at it all day. So anyway, the last concept here in that book is there's two types of innovators. The conceptual, so that's Einstein and some of the guys who's really, really smart to begin with. And then there's the other guys like me that just have to learn and learn and learn by experiment. And, you know, the main difference is, for me, invent something in an area that I don't know. The reason that M&T is good at what we do, right? So we have a lot of experience. That'd be simpler, right? Just one change, one difference. But it took a long time. So the thesis work and all that was one thing. The NSF funding is a program when you have something new for a new market. At this time, you can get $2 million non-inclusive to take your idea for it. It was less money for us back then, but they increased their budget. So in their history, we did a first trial here. They gave us just $150K. For $150K, we made our first machine to go to the field. Today, we don't do anything for $150K. It it's not this way. But, you know, when we think about innovation and the collaboration and what Chris is doing here as far as bringing operator, regulators, and service provider together, it is the only reason why in this industry there's been, you know, inline inspection, there's been laser, there's been a lot of innovation. So I have a lot of respect. I'm always going to remember that it was the right choice to make the tool for the firefighters. So going back to the history, we made field testing services, and now we have commercial instrument. So, you know, we have been successful, we survived. And even today, the investor says, all I want to do, Simone, is I want you guys to survive. So it's great, you know. But the last piece before I turn it over to Brendon is this aspect of saying, I'm going to go and try to do this. And it is the hardest thing to do. Is it really a good idea? And, you know, probably other people have thought of it before, and there must be a reason, right? And I call that devil's advocate. And it's going to go in almost, if you ever have an idea, if you see somebody that has an idea, for me it came from the in-laws. You know, for 6 months, come on, are you really going to do this? Are you going to really try this? You know, it sounds like difficult. You know, there's somebody that's going to, you know, buy it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you face that all along the way, but it starts very, very early. And it's tough. And it's going to be one of the topics Brendon talks about as well. If you guys design something, sometimes you're going to have to do this. It's not this, sometimes. It's just the way it is. So, in my case, my answer was, I'm not sure if it's a good idea, okay? But you know what? This is a concept from Gary Vee. This guy came pretty rough at the beginning, very successful entrepreneur, and this is some of this concept that he puts forward. Is, you know, what if I fail? Well, still probably can find a job, right? I'm still young. You know, so that's the backup plan. You know, go get a day job. Are people going to make fun of me? Well, they make fun of me anyway. Yeah, so you can read the rest. Small risk? Yeah. So the first risk for me was to start a consulting company. I have to work for a big company. I had no idea I was going to do. I had 6 months that, you know, I'm still paying for food and rent. You know, are you gonna be disappointed? Are people gonna be disappointed? Well, it's just, you know, your own decision at the end of the day. What I would say is there has been times that I really wish I didn't do it. And there's been time that I would not talk to somebody that was, you know, a year or two before me, or 3 years before me, that was willing to enroll into this journey and said, yeah, you know, it's worth it. But, you know, in terms of personal growth, it's definitely huge. It's probably the one thing. It's not going to be the money. It's the fact that I don't feel I'm the same person I was 5 years ago. And that's, to me, is the biggest difference. So when you talk about taking small bets, well, for us, there was a point that it was pretty much you take poker, you put all the money on the table. So that's what you see here. It's our house. The kids are very, very young. I'm gradually weaning off doing consulting work. I'm still teaching at MIT because I feel like I want to do it. And you have the 2 other people in the room here. Brendon is going to be talking, and Park, who's going to acknowledge, you know, this for all his contributions. So I hope it was a little entertaining. I know this is not going to allow you to design stuff, and that's why I'm going to turn over to the guy that really made it happen. And he's very nervous. He doesn't like to talk, but he knows his shit. But even if you try to convince him to take a job, he doesn't want to do design anymore. Okay, just the same way that I'm not going to do a startup anymore. I'm going to be at MIT, you know, in 5 years. It always works like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Simone. There we go. So I'm going to talk about product development at MMT. So I have a bunch of examples of things that went well, things that did not go well, and I'm going to highlight a bunch of the lessons that we learned along the way that ultimately made us successful. So to date, we've developed about 8 generations of this HSD tool, and this year we just finally released our first commercial unit that we're selling to customers now. And all these generations of the HSD had sort of different goals in mind as we developed them, and those goals changed as the company grew. So just to give you a very brief history, we developed our first prototype in 2015. The goal of that really was just to generate data that we could ultimately use to show customers that we had a viable technology for non-destructively determining tensile properties. This device only had one stylus. We very quickly realized it was not nearly accurate enough, so we spent the next couple years with the primary goal of increasing the accuracy of our device. So we spent this time with different configurations of more styluses and stylus geometries and trying to figure out different ways to attach it to the pipe and things like that. And then in 2017, we finally achieved that accuracy goal. We had built the device to be about as accurate as it possibly could be. We also had a great opportunity around this time to showcase our technology to the industry by participating in a blind testing program hosted by PRCI. So once we had this accurate tool, once we had this accurate tool, we began to show it off to the industry. Our business started to grow. We started to partner with NDT companies. We started training their technicians on how to use our technology. So it became very obvious to us that we needed to shift our focus from accuracy to making a tool that was more robust and easy to use. So that's really what we did for the next 2 years. And then in 2019, we had achieved the robustness and the ease of use, and we shifted focus to building our commercial unit. So we had shifted our goals yet again to making a device now that was more compact and more aesthetically pleasing. So probably the most important concept through all of this product development was that of the minimum viable product. So if you Google a definition for this, you can see a lot of slight variance on the definition, but this is the one that I like the best. It also comes from the guy that came up with the concept. So minimum viable product is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about the customers with the least amount of effort. So we would kind of slightly tweak this definition to be more in line with achieving goals rather than learning about customers. I just say that because early on in our company, before we really had a product, we weren't necessarily prioritizing customer feedback. But essentially, whenever we were going to get ready to do a build cycle, we would get together, figure out a set of goals for that particular build cycle aimed at collecting the appropriate data that we cared about collecting, and then we'd work on achieving those goals and only those goals. So for example, when our goal was accuracy, we weren't paying much attention to or putting much effort into what our tester looked like. So you can see a pretty good example of that right here in this picture that I'm showing. This is a very early prototype. Our customers used to make fun of us quite a bit for having this. They used to call it the fish tank model. They like to give us a hard time about that. But it's very important to spend a fair amount of time figuring out the appropriate goals, figuring out the appropriate goals, and then making sure that you don't deviate from them. So whenever we would start one of these new design cycles, we would use this process called iterative prototyping. This allowed us to follow this mantra, I guess, of fail fast, learn fast. So this was very beneficial to us. We had very short design cycles. Our first couple prototypes that we made, we built in 1 to 2 months. Now we use about a 6-month process. So with a more traditional design process, you'd typically sit in front of CAD, make a complete design. You'd build it, you'd evaluate it, you'd tweak it as necessary, and then your design's final. with this iterative prototyping approach, rather than making a complete model, we'd make a handful of working models. We'd build all of them, evaluate all of them with customer feedback if we could, then we'd iterate this process until the product was considered final. So rather than sitting in front of CAD and designing something to death, we'd try to build things as fast as we could. And the biggest benefit of this is that we learned the most in the shortest amount of time when we could build something and hold it in our hands. It would usually, we'd find issues that we never could have found just by looking at a CAD model, and we'd always come up with new ideas. So obviously collecting feedback from your customers is very important. So we would collect feedback while we were doing the prototyping process and after the design was done and the product went out to the field. So since up until last year, we were primarily a service providing company. One of our most important customers was our in-house field technicians that used the devices. So we would use them to evaluate our prototypes, and then when they took the device out to the field, they would log issues for us. Now that we're selling commercial equipment, we have a tech support division that essentially does all of this for us, collects all the feedback from customers and technicians and things. But ultimately, we take all of this information that we collect and we use it to drive future product development cycles. So there can be some challenges with collecting feedback. So engineers obviously are a great source of feedback because they're the ones designing the tool. But there were times when we had to be careful and make sure that the things the engineers wanted to fix were consistent with what our goals were and with the minimum viable product process. Engineers oftentimes would want to fix things that were already working just because they had better ideas or they thought it might be fun to do so. But when resources are limited, you really have to make a strong case if you're and then you just have to be careful not to prioritize the wrong feedback. So we realized, or we would get a lot of feedback from customers. It wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't really appropriate for our company at its particular stage of growth. So we also learned that if you go around and talk to many people in the industry, be it business development, salespeople, engineers, whatever, they all have very different opinions on what your priorities should be for product development. So you have to be careful not to listen to the wrong people. We did actually listen to some of the wrong people in the past, and it hurt us. I have a slide coming up on that. But another valuable thing to do is outsourcing work. So just about everything that we ever did, we always asked the question, can we outsource this to make it more efficient? The benefits of this, occasionally it was cheaper, but the biggest benefit for us was that it freed up internal resources so that they could do other things. So if you do make the decision to outsource, it's very important that you devote internal resources to supporting that stuff. So for example, we outsource a whole lot of mechanical engineering projects. And when we first started doing this, we severely underestimated the amount of time it can take to get outside consultants up to speed and transfer knowledge so that they can do useful work for you. So as a consequence of that, initially we paid a bunch of consultants to do work for us when we couldn't actually use the work. And then seek expert review. So even if we weren't necessarily paying consultants to give us new work product, we would oftentimes get people just to review what they're doing so they can either confirm that we're doing a good job or tell us ways that we can. Just two examples here of previous product development cycles. One that went really well, one that did not go so well. So the one that did not go very well, it didn't go very well because we relied on some bad advice. This was at a time when we should have been focusing on the accuracy of our tool, but we let someone convince us that if we took our tool out to the ditch and it didn't look like it was fully automated and easy to use, that no one was going to take us seriously. So that was the first mistake. And then we had an engineer that took this advice to heart and had this idea to build this really sophisticated automated process, and we kind of let him just run wild with it. That was the second mistake, because he ended up building a device which wasn't really very reliable. We probably spent more time fixing it than we actually spent time getting data with it. And then this seems kind of obvious now, but if you build a device that can't deliver the data that your customer wants, they really don't care whether or not it looks good or if it's easy or hard to use. So it was not a minimum viable product. It was a big lost opportunity for us to make progress with accuracy. So luckily we learned some lessons from this very quickly. The next generation device that we built, we reverted back to manual operation. We shifted our focus back to accuracy, so we were back to making a minimum viable product. We had learned lessons previously from working with consultants, and we were able to successfully integrate 3 consultants into this project. They helped us develop this relatively sophisticated device in about 4 months, and we ultimately achieved our accuracy goal. Yeah, so just to summarize this, we believe that our keys to success were this minimum viable product idea, iterative prototyping, so building a lot of things really quickly, customer feedback, development cycles, outsourcing to make you more efficient, and then expert review. So we ultimately have been successful. Young engineers taught us that coming up with really good ideas is very, very easy to do, but bringing things to the finish line is definitely not so easy to do. But we were able to reach a sort of quasi-finish line by following these processes. So I'm going to hand it over to Simone to question.
Sure. I'm Richard Beal, and I'm the guy that Chris Alexander uses for example. He does hockey lunch. So my question for you is, the challenges mostly mechanical equipment design, hardware, or the software focused, the use of the data that you gather?
We had huge challenges with all of them, actually, but we outsourced a lot of the software and the electrical stuff, so at least we had someone to yell at when those went bad. The mechanical stuff, we only had ourselves to yell at, so that was a little tougher. But yeah, there were issues everywhere.
I remember being in Paris with my wife, this one thing, you got the in-laws and having to talk with Brendon on the phone because we had mechanical friction in the equipment. And I was looking at accuracy because things would just, not have some artificial load changes. And that caused some team friction, at that point. So when the team really, they say that when if you go for funding, you need a team and you need to be able to show that you guys are going to be working together. I really want to acknowledge Parth Patel here, and I warned you had to stand up. Parth has been with us since 2016. He came, was a brand new guy. He came with his suit, and so I was a little worried because back then we really needed people to sand pipe and go on there and do all those things. But guess what? 2 months later, that's exactly what he was doing. He's been an amazing team leader for the younger people, training them and grooming them, and now training other people from other companies to use the equipment. 2 years ago, he was really the man to call whenever he had a technical question. He knew. He was doing from the very, very beginning to providing his name on the final report. But really, what makes it a little better today, hopefully, is we made a commitment to call tech support as opposed to calling, right? That for me was still a learner only 6 months ago. So Parth, thank you for all your hard work, and we're very pleased to feel like you are one of our key experts. Thank you. Everyone did apply. Questions, you guys, we have a booth. Thank you.
Thank y'all.